Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this coffee and conversation in honor of Teacher Appreciation Week and May as Mental Health Awareness Month. We encourage you to grab your coffee, your tea, whatever you'd like as we engage in a really rich conversation with some amazing speakers from Teaching for Change and Black Lives Matter at school. Before we begin our conversation, my name is Kimberly Ellis, and I am joined by my colleague, Erica Robertson, our Georgetown policy resident. I am the Education and New Fellow with Teaching for Change and Communities for Just Schools Fund. You're going to hear much more about the powerful work of Teaching for Change. And so right now, I'll just speak a little bit to the work of Communities for Just Schools Fund, known as CJSF. We're a national collaborative that provides resources and support to 80+ community-led grassroots organizing groups who are advancing education justice. You can read more about our collective work and the power and importance of our partners' work in our 2022 annual report, which is just shared in the chat. In this conversation, we'll be joined by Vanessa Williams of DC Area Educators for Social Justice, a project of Teaching for Change, and Ken K. Robertson and Dr. Denisha Jones, both from Black Lives Matter at school. I highly encourage you to check out the work of these amazing individuals and their path to where they are today. And that'll be coming in the chat as well. We'll have a panel-style conversation focused on the challenges impacting the teaching profession and our partners' vision for education justice. At the end, we'll open up the conversation for questions from you all. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions throughout this conversation. We're intentionally hosting this conversation during both Teacher Appreciation Week and Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a time where attention is once again focused on teachers, intended to uplift them through a week full of appreciations and celebrations. And yet, for so many, this week and the trinkets, the food, the things typically tied to it, they feel hollow and insincere. The week comes amidst poor working conditions and threats that are driving teachers out of schools, including the continued restriction of their autonomy, lack of support and insufficient classroom resources, and banned critical consciousness building discussions. It's challenging to be in the classroom. And arguably, the work has gotten increasingly more challenging amidst the ongoing pandemic and the so-called culture wars. And Ken K, I'd love to turn to you first as someone who is currently in the classroom and even took some time today to join us for this important conversation. I'm wondering about your reflections around some of the challenges that are facing educators. How do those challenges impact young people? And what is some of the work that you're doing, your organization is doing to address those challenges?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kinga Robertson, pronouns she, her, hers. And thank you all for having me. So I feel like when I think about the different type of issues that goes on in public schools, I think immediately my first response is always the resources. Thinking about what life is like after COVID, what that means to be in schools where our per pupil funds are less than our surrounding areas, and thinking about also this idea of where students are versus where they're supposed to be at, and thinking about what's going to be the main thing that helps my students want to be here, and helps them feel like they are cared for in ways that are respective to their beings. So my philosophy in teaching is like, this is my thing I always say, like I'm addressing the racial violence in educational spaces by taking on the teaching with tenderness practices. So this is looking at students from a holistic view. So emotionally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and academically, because if those things are not all aligned, I cannot produce the whole child. So that's how I like to move in my classroom. So being that the spaces that education systems hold up don't always promote that. It's always academics first. It's always bias testing first. And it's always centered around whiteness, which makes public schools predominantly in urban areas, not really places of hope and justice and love, and more so places where students really are not that fond of coming to. So when I think about the different issues, they're not just ones that happen inside the classroom, but more so environment, community, life changes, and life circumstances that surround people of color. And being that the school where I'm at is like 97% Black. So thinking about the challenges that students take on is just you and then bring that to the classroom. Um, so that's kind of what I think of when I think of like what issues are coming along, and also thinking about how we as teachers, we're humans first, right, before we teach. So thinking about how are we honoring ourselves and our students at the same time. So,
Thank-
so I think your second part you asked, what are we doing in the class? I mean, where did second part you said what are we doing or what type of work that we're working on?
Yeah, what are some of the things that BLM at school is doing to address these challenges?
So one of the major things is we're always all year round looking for different resources, holding different events, different spaces for youth, activists, community leaders, teachers, those in higher ed to be able to contribute and also to learn more and engage in different ways. But on the curriculum committee as well, we have our Black Lives Matter at School Week, where we compile lots of different resources on various topics surrounding our principles, and we create curriculum for different teachers, teacher educators, leaders, all of those who want to do the work to gather all the resources they would like and bring it back to their spaces, right? So we only could, well, not we only, but we allow people to do it in ways that are humanizing to them and allows them much flexibility in the spaces that they take up to share what Black Lives Matter at school is doing with their classes.
Thank you so much. Those are resources that I use when I was in the classroom, and on the Teaching for Change side, we're heavily involved with the curriculum fair, and those resources have been amazing and like really just like a life support for so many educators who can feel alone in their commitment to this work. Along that same thread, Dr. Jones, I have a question for you around, there's a recent article in Ed Week, which we'll share in the chat, and it's titled "Teachers Aren't Burnt Out. They are being set up to fail." In it, the author, Alexandra Robbins, she mentions a joint American Federation of Teachers and Badass Teachers Association survey that reveals almost 2/3 of educators find work always or often stressful. As the assistant executive director of Badass Teachers Association, can you speak more to the takeaways from that survey, what you're learning and seeing about the challenges educators are facing?
Sure. Thank you so much, Kimberly, for having me, and good to see you again in Kenge. So actually, I can speak to both that survey, but also current research that I'm doing right now on the same issue. So the Badass Teachers Association has a subgroup called the quality of teachers' work life. And so in 2017, we surveyed about 5,000 teachers working with the American Federation of Teachers about the teaching profession, about stress. And so some of the things we found out back then, again, this is 2017, on nearly 2/3 or 61% of educators find work always or often stressful, twice the rate of other workers. We also looked at levels of being bullied and harassed or threatened on the job. 27% of educators said they had been threatened, bullied, or harassed, versus 7% of adults in the general population, right? So we're seeing that as a higher rate in the field of education. When asked who was the bully, 35% identified a principal, administrator, or supervisor, and 50% said it was a student, right? And so we're seeing more stories about that as well, too. And so educators said that they had at least a moderate level of control over basic decisions in their classroom, but they report having far less influence over policy decisions, right, such as establishing curriculum, professional development, and budget. So to put this in context, this was all before COVID, right? So we've always known teaching is a highly stressful profession, large attrition rates, right? Meaning most new teachers leave the profession within 1 to 5 years. And so it's always been problematic, and there are different things that come and kind of ebb and flow and make it worse, right? When COVID hit, myself and two of my colleagues, Breon Kramer at Southern Utah University and Clinton Broadbent, also at Southern Utah University, we decided to kind of study the impacts of COVID, right? And so this isn't published quite yet. We're working on a few pieces, but we've presented the findings from a 2-phase mixed method study where we did, the first phase was in 2020, around December 2020, 2020, we surveyed about 1,000 teachers. We've got coverage from all 50 states plus DC. In Puerto Rico. And then we did about 22 interviews with some of the teachers who did the survey. And we were trying to find out like what happened, what was the impact, how did you adjust, what was life like in the spring of 2020 when school shut down, and then in that reopening fall 2020 semester. And those findings really indicated that it was really stressful. Like we were kind of shocked at some of the stories we were hearing in the interviews, teachers not feeling safe, right, because of the pandemic, masking. This was before the vaccinations came out. Teachers feeling like they were being thrown under the bus because schools wanted to reopen, but then teachers weren't willing to go back and risk their health or the health of their loved ones at home who might have been at higher risk. And so then districts were kind of like throwing them under the bus saying, well, we can't reopen because teachers won't come to work, right? So there was a lot. You remember in spring 2020, there was like, teachers are great because parents at home now teaching their kids, and they felt it. But that quickly waned when the rest of the world thought teachers should just go back to sacrificing themselves. And remember this, they put themselves in a sacrificial path every day, right? With school violence and that sort of thing. COVID was not just about teachers sacrificing themselves. It was, again, the people in their homes. They were legitimately worried that they would bring the virus home and infect a partner, a spouse, a relative, someone who had a higher risk, right? That was very different. And I don't think people were prepared for that. Teachers know that the job is stressful, the job is risky. They show up to the classroom, they're worried constantly about gunmen and things like that happening. But now you're asking them to bring that worry, bring that fear, bring that stress back into their house. And many of them just weren't willing to do that, right? And for good reasons, right? So that led us to phase 2 of the study, where we specifically focused on stress, burnout, and mental health. And here we surveyed 4,000 teachers. We used three measures that looked at those different things: the burnout measure, depression measure, and mental health measure. And then we asked teachers to give us like descriptive responses. We got almost 200 of those. And then we did focus groups, 9 focus groups with about 35 teachers. And again, another round of interviews, about 36 teachers. And here we were able to pinpoint how the stress and the burnout is happening. And it's not, how the stress and exhaustion is going beyond burnout, right? Burnout is something we keep hearing about. Teachers are burnt out. And it kind of implies teachers can fix this on their own. Get better at your boundaries, right? Self-care. You can't self-care your way out of this, right? This is not enough self-care in the world to help teachers deal with what's happening systemically to the profession from COVID, from the attacks on CRT and the book banning and the accountability, right? Those things can't be self-cared. So what we're seeing is that teachers are morally injured. There is so much that they go into the profession wanting to do right by children, and that's a moral value they bring to the work. And when they can't do that anymore, they feel it's an injury, right, to who they are and an affront to what they're able to do, right? And so we saw signs of that, and teachers just being like, more than ever, feeling like they can't go into the classroom and do their work and be a parent at home to young children. They got nothing left to give to their personal lives, to their families. That kept coming up. And then it was leading to they weren't able to engage really well in their work, right? They weren't planning their lessons as well or into it as well, because it's a cycle, right? It's a vicious cycle of teachers feeling like they're not able to do what they're supposed to do, and it's outside of their control. I think that's the biggest point, right? So we're seeing it continuing. We looked at different states, right? We took the 3 quantitative measures and we looked across, and the average numbers of like depression might be 21, where our average was 27 on a scale out of 29, right? So our teachers across the board were highly, we had to keep moving it because it didn't fit with the average across the board of all professions. And that was for stress, for burnout, and for depression, and for burnout and depression. And then the stories we got, right? The having to work nonstop was another big one. We were surprised to hear that going back into school in 21-22 was actually harder than 2021, because they were back in person for the most part, but there was a lot of extra work getting the students re-normed into what it was like to be back in school culture. And there was so much extra workload on top of teachers. Teaching was already stressful and full of workload, and it got worse in that year back. And there was just this kind of attitude like, we're back to normal, everything's okay. Everything's not normal. Kids have been out of school for a long time. Families are struggling to make ends meet. And teachers are being villainized for wanting to teach about racial justice on one end, but then being told to like meet these targets and get back to this level of accountability that was never there to begin with. So it's dire, right? I will say our research is showing us that it's bad, and we don't have a ton of teachers of color. We do have some, and their stories were actually uniquely different, right? What they're facing as well too, in the midst of this new teachers of color not being supported in their district, being told not to teach certain things and to just move forward in ways that are harmful to students. And they tend to bear the brunt of that moral injury, right? When we ask teachers of color to do things that harm students of color, right? We see that show up a lot in the work as well too.
Thank you for that, Dr. Jones. And I can't wait for this study to be published so we can all read more about all the great findings that you're sharing with us, because this is such an important topic. And you and Kinke, you both shared a lot about the challenges and things that are going on within the classroom right now. But I'd like to turn to Vanessa, as a previous educator, for you to share a little bit about your perspective on what you think can be done to improve conditions for educators. We hear Dr. Jones say, you can't self-care your way out of this, right? So what do you think are some of the true potential solutions for improving conditions for educators across the country?
Sure thing. Yeah, of course. And gosh, y'all, this is such an incredible conversation so far. I'm excited to dig in some more. But one of the things that I like to focus our attention to is and we're already doing that here in this space, right? Is to listen to teachers and also respond to them. Right? Like, I mean, people are so quick to be like, to say, educators like, oh, we know that educators know how to improve conditions in their schools, when their classrooms, their schools, districts, the everly increasing spaces that they're reporting to, I guess. But also not just listen, but also respond and be in solidarity with them, right? So let them name the things that they need, and also put the funds, put the time, put the policy, put the insert whatever response that you are capable of doing into action, and beyond the platitudes or the we care, we value you, show it, right? Say it and show it by your actions. So uh of course other folks who are more actively in classrooms would have a better idea of what conditions need to change. I was in the classroom as recently as the 2020-2021 school year, and was in a different region. I was in North Carolina, but yeah, just listen to people, listen and respond, right? And act, not just say, but show. So I hope that captures a good response.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Vanessa. And I know you mentioned you're not currently in the classroom, but we are joined by Nkinke, who is in the classroom. And so I'd be happy to hear your thoughts too around what are some conditions, what are ways that you think folks could change the conditions within the classroom for educators?
You know what, to me, I feel I always look at it from two perspectives. So me being someone that's still a novice teacher, so this is my third going on fourth year of teaching. I don't have children and my workload is different, right? So being that, okay, when I came in, I was getting my master's degree. So I finished that, right? I feel like one of the major things I would say is a true component, and I hate to lead with it, but is the pay. Sometimes I feel like when we think about the workload that teachers take on and the pay, yeah, I make a decent living, right? But that decent living depends on me working an extra class throughout every day, right? And I'm dependent on that extra $53 a day. I'm dependent on my after school pay. I'm tutoring after school as well. So it's I can't just be a teacher. And the teacher is not the job where it just ends at 3:20, where a lot of our other jobs, honestly, if we truly could think about it, unless you're on call, your job ends when your time ends. So with us, it's following us at home, right? It comes into the home life. And I couldn't imagine being a parent, probably even being a committed spouse, right? And having to also deal with the fact of dealing with kids during a certain time and coming home and dealing with my mental health and this, that, and the other, right? So I feel like making it a space where teachers are able to be valued more, and we're honestly being paid what we're worth, right? And thinking about not just us being in the classroom, but the rigor, the stress of not just dealing with being a teacher, right? Because being a teacher is coming in, teaching a lesson, and making sure the kids, quote unquote, meet the standards. But what about making sure that students are okay, right? Just spending the time with taking the extra time out of maybe this lesson is not going to go as planned because I have students that are burnt out themselves, right? I don't get, any type of consideration for things like that. So when I think about teaching, I think about us changing the climate, the expectations, the micromanaging, and the policing of grown adults.
Yes, I was trying to type all the things you said in the chat. These were all, yes, absolutely agree 100%. And Kike, thank you so much for that, that very real response. And I think pay is such a big thing, and you shouldn't feel ashamed for having to lead with that because it's a huge part of the conditions of educators right now. And so with that, I'll turn to Dr. Jones, if you want to add anything to what Nkike and Vanessa have already shared around changing conditions for educators in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And the pay is a huge thing. And none of us should be doing this work. I mean, we're not in it for the income or doing it for the outcome. No, we are professionals. Teachers are some of the most highly professional people I know. I've got the students getting a master's degree for $70,000, and yet they're not supposed to be paid well. Like it absolutely makes no sense. And we need to pull out of that, right? Teachers shouldn't have to marry wealthy just to be able to do their job and not have to be concerned about it, right? And I couldn't stay in teaching because I made more money as a waitress, to be frank, quite frankly, when I was doing teaching kindergarten, and I couldn't give it up, right? Because it just wasn't enough. And so at all levels, right? We have to remember, like, our paraprofessionals, everyone who's working in the school is being treated in the system that's highly unfair, and it's part of the problem as well too. And so I think, to add to that, right, to thinking about the conditions, right? Teachers need more autonomy and agency in their work, right? We can't take a person and give them all of this knowledge and skills. Like the higher educated you are, the more autonomy you're supposed to have, right? That's the whole idea, right? If you don't want to, if you don't get a higher ed degree and you just go work for someone else, then you're not going to have a lot of autonomy. That's kind of the understanding, right? But teachers are the outlier, right? They get a lot of training, bachelor's degrees, certification, all of this, but they get less and less autonomy and agency as they go along. And that is problematic, right? Because teaching requires that you have a lot of control and say over what you do, right? It's like we give you this knowledge and these skills, we have to then trust you to execute it. And too much of what we're trying to do is teacher-proof everything. We're trying to, reduce the curriculum to just reading what's on the screen in front of you and not knowing your students really well. Or we're trying to turn assessment into something that can be done by a machine, right? Not even through the hands of a teacher. And so what we see is that the lack of agency and autonomy really produces teachers who are not really good at what they do, right? They're not at the best at what they can do because they don't have those two things that are really needed in their profession. If we think about all the decisions teachers have to make every day in the classroom, right? You need that autonomy to be able to make those decisions, reflect on them, change your mind, especially around the curriculum, right? If you can't sit back and get a big bird's eye picture of the curriculum and what it is you're trying to do, then think about your students and who they are, and then make decisions based on that, because you have someone telling you that's not fidelity, that's not the way it's supposed to be, then you're not able to do your job really well. Teachers have to know their students inside and out, know them really well, to then make the best decisions on how to educate them, how to support them. I like how Nkenge said the whole child, right? Like it's not just their academics, right? And so they need that kind of support. And, it was interesting when we did the first round of study with COVID, there were teachers who had these great ideas about turning distance learning into something wonderful. And the ones who weren't supported by their principals were the ones who left, right? Like you had this great idea about how to do all this stuff. And then the principal's like, no, stay in your place. That's not your job. Like, that is her job. Her job is to make this manageable right now. And she had a great idea and a great system, and you denied her, right? And then she ended up leaving because she didn't feel valued there, right? And so I think when we don't trust teachers, right? On one hand, we're like, go stand in front of the classroom, take a bullet for these children, die from COVID for them. But at the same time, you you don't get to pick the books in the classroom, submit your lessons to be reviewed because we don't trust you that you're indoctrinating our kids to be anti-racist. And so that needs to be torn apart, right? Either we fully support these teachers and we trust them and we give them the autonomy and the agency so that they can do what they want, or we have to come, we're going to continue to have the system that we have, right? Which is where people are overworked, they're underappreciated, they're not able to give their fullest, and the children are not able to develop to their fullest as well, too.
Yes, teacher proofing. Yes. I'm curious about, Vanessa, in one of your responses, you mentioned solidarity, and I'm wondering about what do you think that looks like? So when you think about education justice advocates, so those who are not in the classroom or who maybe aren't even in a school building, what are the demands? What are the asks of others? What do you think that solidarity looks like? And so I'm opening that to you and to anyone else, just like what are some of the demands and the asks of education justice advocates?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me is what we've seen, especially the last, year and a half too, with like this minority of like very, very loud voices, right? Thinking specifically about curriculum and book bannings and things like this, and a slew of other like deeply entrenched issues that people have been talking about for decades now as well, right? But if I'm talking or thinking specifically about like this heightened like attacks on teaching the truth and about those conditions and how that's worsening conditions or making it even more difficult in an already taxing profession, right? It's to be louder than the disrespect, right? To show up, to I can plug some our days of action. We have one coming up in June 10th, which is one way that anybody we want to center educators, we want to center educate or students, excuse me, anybody that is, but I mean everyone's a stakeholder and everyone is should be concerned. And again, voicing their solidarity, showing solidarity with educators by saying their own pledges or voicing like how valuable they find teaching the truth is for educators as well, right? So I mean, and it could be like actionable in that way, and going to specific like rallies, events, protests, demonstrations, things like that. But also just like in the everyday, right? School board meetings. If you feel so inclined, like running for some sort of position, right? If again, they're going to be in support of educators, and also like I mean, like not to keep on feeding the like small something, right? But like it also does go a long way to me. Like just saying like a simple email or like telling educators like I think you're doing great. I think the work that you're doing. I see the effort, and it may not be appreciated by insert terrible people here, right? It may not be supported like in that regard, but like I see you, I feel you, I appreciate you, and I'm going to defend, support, and amplify you and your work and the amazing thing that you're doing every single day, right? So I mean, it can and should be taking a lot of different forms, and again, we got plenty of resources and ways that you can plug in that way, but also just in the person to person, the interpersonal is also, I think it's when I was teaching, I found it very valuable as well.
Thank you for that. And Kincaid, Dr. Jones, wondering if there's anything you want to weigh on in or talk about maybe some of the demands of the Black Lives Matter at School movement.
Sure. I think our demands are definitely a way that we are definitely trying to push back and to advocate for broad changes to education, right? So we started with, hire more Black teachers, right? It's a shame that this is something that's still an issue. So I worked with DC educators for social justice when I was living in DC, and during our week of action one year, we had an event at a school. I think it was one of the high schools. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name, but we decided to put the demands around the room, and we sent kids, right, to go to the demands. And literally, we're in DC, aka Chocolate City, and there are a group of kids sitting there saying, I've never had a Black teacher, I'm in high school, right? This is still happening, right? In a city like DC, in a city like I'm near New York, right? It's happening a lot. And so I think that we speak to that issue and we kind of push that because we know that all children need Black teachers, but especially children of color, and Black children need Black teachers as well too. But then we also have to make sure that when we get them, right, that we're recruiting them into teacher ed programs and giving them the education that they need. And then when we get to schools, we're supporting them and we're not turning them into the male disciplinarian, right? And so that they don't feel welcome, they're not valued there. We're not pitting them against other teachers. That teacher I mentioned, one of the teachers of color we had in our study sheet, the first year teacher talked about how, and she was a woman of color, how she was being told by older white women teachers not to associate with the Black teachers or she wouldn't last there, right? So that was like the kind of attitude she was given, the advice she was given in as a new teacher. And so she was feeling pulled between wanting to align with other teachers of color who are caring about the children and being told that that's not the right way. So getting them in the door is not enough, right? We have to do more to support all teachers and especially Black teachers and teachers of color while in the classroom as well too. And then I think that issue around restorative justice, right? And helping teachers, I think, the issue comes up a lot about teachers and discipline and students, right? You saw in that survey results, students do tend to bully teachers. It's a huge issue. We're seeing more and more with students and challenging behavior. And so we put teachers in this place where all they can do is what they want is more supports. And what we give them is more punitive discipline. And so that doesn't solve the issue, right? Teachers are going to take whatever they can get. And if all we're giving them is suspension and expulsion, then those are the only tools that they have. But if we give them other tools, real tools, not just handle it yourself, but real support, real restorative justice, real training and education and support around things like mindfulness and other things that really help reduce issues that students are having, then I think teachers would be less apt to turn to punitive discipline, right? But that's all they're getting in response to the fact that, students need a lot of help. There's a lot that's going on in the classroom, and so we need to do that. And then thinking about the curriculum, and Black Lives Matter is an activist group that's really thought about changing the curriculum in schools to kind of address anti-Blackness as it happens and kind of provide the 13 guiding principles, other ways to think about Black people and their contributions and role in this country that doesn't really start from a deficit viewpoint. So I think those are all really helpful things that we're doing and putting forth. And I think there's a lot more trying to get police out of schools and to get more counselors, right? That whole part about the discipline. If your school has more police than counselors, more police than social workers, more police than nurses, right? Then you're showing what your values are. And your values are that you treat children like criminals and not people who need help, right? Not people who need a counselor or a nurse or a sociologist or social worker who can help them.
And to piggyback off of Denisha's point, I'm also thinking about like once teachers really get inside that classroom, right? So we already know for the majority, for the most part, our teacher prep programs are very white, right? And you have a white centered focus on what we're being taught, the skills, how we even look at Black and brown youth, looking at them from a deficit base. And worst of all, that savior mindset, right? I'm here to save you. I'm the one that can fix all your problems, and not really looking at youth for who they are and the different values and skills and beautiful things that they can bring, right? And I feel like when we come inside these classes, if you don't have professors or mentors or people you come across or organizations that can support the values of how the teacher you want to be, it can become really harmful. So I feel like just because people look at, oh, you're a Black teacher, you're for the school, you're this, you're that, it's not about really the color of your skin, but your character for real when it comes to who's taking up space inside the classrooms. And I think about it, if it wasn't for like Dr. Lamar Johnson or Dr. April Baker Bill and Black Lives Matter at school, it's like, where would I really get the foundation to learn about the anti-racism that goes on, or to learn about the curricular violence, or learning about the emotional violence and different things that go on inside of a classroom? I feel like making more support and creating more avenues for teachers to have a place where they can lean on and be supported out loud. So of course we know teacher prep programs, we know how to become a teacher, get certified, but it's like there's a gap of where those places are that uplift and affirm teachers who really want to do the work on a local level.
Thank you for that, and highlighting, the way teachers prep programs typically operate and the composition. I am thinking about kind of inspired by a little bit of what each one of you said of the ways that we deploy teachers as cops. And on this note of like restorative justice, there are some really powerful examples of educators who are organizing alongside students and families. So for example, CJSF partner Teachers Unite in New York City, they conducted a community participatory action research to move the conversation about restorative justice in schools. And so we'll drop in the chat their fabulous website on our terms, which is highlighting their work. And so I'm curious about either in your organization or just the different spaces you've been in, what examples have you seen of educators, students, and families conspiring together?
I don't know if he's directed that at one person in particular, but after a little teacher wait time, I'm happy to jump in there. So there are lots of, I think there's lots of things showing the teachers, students and teachers working together, conspiring together to do things. And really push back. In New York City, you know, we organized the Black Lives Matter School, but we started this teen youth council that's really taken over and organizing around the week of action and holding an event. It went from, you know, one day like, oh, they would get together and maybe be at the protest to a whole day where they're running an entire conference and adults just need to be like the adult in the building to keep security at bay and or to run and get supplies for them. And they're very good at like setting this up, teaching the 13 guiding principles to each other, really thinking about the demands and what it means to them. And so we've seen that, and it's really just, it's great. And it's not just in New York City, that's the one I'm most familiar with. But I know in Seattle, they've also done a lot with the youth taking over for Black Lives Matter at school, and really for putting their thoughts in the forefront of the movement. You know, every year we get emails from youth who are like, oh my God, we want to do this at my school. Do we have to get an adult? Like, I'm like, no, youth can do this, right? You don't need an adult. I mean, if you find one, great, but you don't need one. And so they're really interested in and actively seeking this type of experience in the school, this type of education, this type of programming. And so we're happy to see it. And we encourage everyone working across to really think about how they're engaging with the youth, and not in a superficial way where they're just like using them for props, but really like stepping back and letting the youth lead, right? And I think that's super important. And teachers, it's a work in progress. A lot of teachers who struggle with that need a little, you know, advice on how to do it. But the ones who are doing it, they realize that it's really beneficial, right, to kind of step back and let the youth take the lead in a lot of this work that we're doing. And to me, it speaks to that agency, right? Teachers can't give agency to students if they don't have it themselves, right? And so it's very reciprocal. And so the more teachers are given agency and autonomy in their work, the more they're willing to step back and give that to their students. And that's really important because Black and Brown students lack agency in a lot of school systems, right? Where they don't have any control over the learning, how they're going to learn, what they're going to learn, as opposed to other students who might get that depending on the environment they're in. So I think, you know, there are definitely stories out there and we love hearing them. And there's a lot of room for more, right? And think about how we center youth and participatory action research with youth is another great way to really do that for people who are interested in.
So since you've mentioned it, Dr. Jones, I did, well, stop teaching about stories or talking about stories. Like I was, when you posed that question, Kimberly, like I was like just fishing through like a lot of teaching stories that like we've, you know, written together or just ones that were published like even before like we came into the program itself. So I'm going to drop a link to teaching stories. There are a lot of just like really wonderful examples of educators like within classrooms, but also like just whole school communities coming together, or I mean, stuff that's happening like out of school time as well. You know, a nice big selection of them. I can identify a number, I'm sure. And you know, people can also praise it on their own time. But just really powerful examples of people that are taking on different issues, celebrating justice and joy, and the many wonderful things that can happen like in classrooms and schools, because of the really just wonderful work that educators are doing every single day. So I'm going to drop that in chat in a second.
Thank you for those responses, y'all. And thank you for just bringing up this idea that stories need to be told, and that all the great things and ways that you're seeing things happening to kind of create better conditions for students, families, and educators alike. And so with that, Our last question for you all. So what are your hopes or dreams for school communities? How are ways that you see kind of like these possibilities emerging throughout your work or others' work throughout education?
Is that a question for everyone? Personally, I would like to see conflict resolution as part of the education experience for our young people. We often question our young people's behavior and why there's a rise in violence in our youth communities. I mean, for this group, I'm sort of, I'm really preaching to the choir here, but just really seeing conflict resolution as part of that experience where we can use things like advisory classes to integrate a conflict resolution curriculum where there are many schools that have restorative practice programming, they may have peer mediation programs, et cetera, but the rest of the school population is left out of that if they aren't leaders in the school or chosen to be part of these programs. So just a way for our young people to understand the language of peace and resolve. And these are things that even as adults, we don't have that language. So once our young people have those skills, I think it can really help to start healing our communities. And we can also bring restorative practices to the homes of our young people to help, to help, build healthier homes and also bring those same practices that our young people are learning in schools into the home. So, so parents are understanding how to use mediations and questioning, especially in the adolescent stage, when there's a breakdown of communication between parent and child.
Absolutely appreciate that. I think mediation is something that's not talked about enough. And so thank you for bringing that into the space. Do other folks have any hopes or dreams for the education communities?
When I think about education communities, and I think more so creating I think a bridge between the community as well. So I feel like the more opportunities or more resources you give you, the less problems that we have, in my opinion, right? Having more things for them to do, having more programs that they can have, right? Giving them skills to do different things, to try different things, or to just even know that it exists, right? School and going home can't be the only thing, right? School or maybe trying to get a summer job that you may or may not get picked for. That can't be a thing, right? Like we need real programs in place. And I feel like we need more people like people that have the time, the space, the energy, the money to really be like, you know what, I want to see something grow and I want to continue it on, right? And I want you, and I want the people out of our cities to really be a part of it. And I feel like there's not enough of those people who are there really on the grassroots, right? And really have even time and space or even the will, to be honest, right? I feel a lot of people really have up. So it's almost like that one or three major players, right? But those one or three major players is not enough. Like I feel like we need.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have anything that they would add to hopes or dreams or things that they're thinking about for the perfect education world?
Yeah, when NK was sharing, it just reminded me of just some ideas that I know I've had around this distinction between education and schooling, right? Like this system itself is like very much like this rote, like I'm going to use it like rigorous or like unrelenting, school starts at this hour and ends at this hour. You learn this. You've got to sit in this chair for, I mean, it's this very just like unhealthy, and I mean, often traumatizing, right? A way of occupying people's time, right, and not really just like enriching their lives, right? So like in my head, what I'm trying to get to is, uh, where schools are places where people are being educated, and that I mean like they're being cared for, they're being nurtured, as again as NK was saying, like at the top, I believe, like students are being cared for and having all their needs addressed and all their needs met, right? Again in a way that's going to be fulfilling and a way that's going to make them like want to be in that space and be again it's not just this thing that I have to do because it's compulsory, right? But because I'm getting enriched, I'm going to be able to leave the space I don't know, it's meant to be enriching and fulfilling, not just a place that I have to report to. So my hope is that, it becomes the space like where education is happening, and by that I mean all the needs are being met to make that happen.
I love that, Vanessa. And if I could just add to it, I study play. I'm an early childhood teacher, kindergarten teacher, and I went to China actually in 2019, right before COVID hit. And there was a rural part of China called Anji. They have what they call true play, where children are just playing outside, inside for hours, just really like being able to construct things in this amazing material, like open-ended materials. Like the first thing they did was got rid of traditional play materials and like gave them really open-ended stuff, and like saw the progression over 20 years. Ms. Cheng, who's been leading the efforts out there, of how children are naturally inclined. Like we forget, like young people and especially little children are so much want to learn. It's so natural. Like they have so many questions. There's so much they don't know and they constantly want to do. And like, if we think about it, there's a quote by Carl Sagan who says that in kindergarten, kids have great questions. They ask tons of questions. They ask, why is the sky blue? And why do we have toes? And, they ask all these great questions. And then he gets to high school and they don't ask any more questions in high school, right? He says they become incurious. And something is going on between kindergarten and 12th grade to make kids who are naturally curious, naturally want to learn, all of a sudden don't want to ask any more questions except, is this going to be on the test, right? And I think that's what you were speaking to, Vanessa, right? That process of schooling takes out the natural curiosity that children bring to them, the natural excitement to want to know, the wonder, and it makes that all go away to learn a bunch of useless knowledge that really doesn't serve most kids anymore. Most of the things that we force kids to memorize, you can look up online. You don't really need to know that, right? And so we haven't really shifted our education in the way that we have. But when children play, right, when we let them play, then they're learning. It's the most natural form of learning. I watched kids spend hours like engaging in constructing these really in-depth experiments and things. They didn't even realize that they were doing high-level physics, right? Because they were trying to get the wheel to go under the tubes, and they were doing all of these amazing things, and they didn't care, right? They were just doing it, experimenting with it, trying it out, and then they put it all away, and then they talk about it and draw pictures, and then they do it again the next day, right? In different ways. And there was so much learning that was happening there. And so, I dream of that for all children. I dream of that especially for Black and Brown children. I got to do some research in Pittsburgh at a school that's a predominantly Black school in the city that's been doing a program called Play Lab, where the teachers would give them an hour, a day for play, open-ended materials inside and outside. It can't be used as punishment. So you can't say, oh, you're not going to Play Lab today, you're not doing your job. It can't. And then during Play Lab, they can't be taken away. You can redirect, but they get to stay in there. And so it's a very much protected space. And over the time, I got to see these young Black kids get really more confident in who they are, playing with these materials, really engaging, their relationships blossom. The teachers started making Play Lab even longer because they thought they said the lessons were going better, like the kids were doing better in class. So we wanted to give more time to Play Lab. My last visit there, they had just gotten reports back, and I don't like tying this to education, but they got reports back that they had some of the highest reading scores in the schools, right? Where the kids in Play Lab, right? So it was beneficial to everyone, to the teachers, right? Who were relaxed and liberated and free to like really engage with the children, see the children, develop these relationships with them. The children were engaged with each other. I mean, everyone was just on board. So that was 3 classes in that school the first year. And now it's every K in 1 class in that school is now doing Play Lab, right? And they're expanding to other schools. So it's possible, it's out there, it's happening. It's just people are afraid because it's not the kind of education we had, right? And so I'm asking teachers to take the 12 years of schooling they had and put that aside and try and imagine something completely different for children. And that's a challenge, but it's doable, right? And so it just takes really showing people, like I had to go, I mean, I've always believed in play, but going to China and seeing it, I was like, this is the future, right? Like it was really, really life-changing. And so the more we get people to see it and to think about, play is equity for Black children, right? If we think about Tamir Rice, who was a young boy who was killed for playing, right? Like never forget that play is equity for Black children, and it's not something they've always been able to do. And so how do we make space for that, right? And thinking about it as a form of liberation for them, but also for the teacher. So as a teacher educator, I'm trying to get teachers to see this liberates you too. Like it's a joint process where you both are liberated and you're both able to engage in teaching and learning that's beyond rote memorization and assessment and standards and that sort of thing. And it's really, I can talk about it all day, but it is my dream of how things could be if we really step back and let the naturalness of young children come through, and that comes through play.
Dr. Jones, drop the mic. Drop the mic. Yes, play is equity for Black children. I love it. I'm going to start saying that, opening all my papers, quoting you. That's just really beautiful, beautifully said. And so with that, I want to open it up to everyone, for folks who have questions for our speakers, if our speakers have questions for each other. Just if anyone has any questions or comments that they'd like to share, feel free to come off mute or put your question or comment in the chat. Okay, well, if no one has any questions, I have another question for our speakers. We talked a lot about supports for educators, and I'm just wondering about if there are examples, in Kincaid or Vanessa or Dr. Jones, if you want to answer this question, what are some supports that you've seen or felt in the school building that have made you feel appreciated as a teacher?
Okay, so one thing, so right now I'm at a new school, but we have a strong union rep, and that's really amazing because not at all schools do they have like a strong union rep and someone that is able to have a voice. So I feel like for again some new bills put in, but if you are like they have something called the new and newer, like a CT meeting for every week, and it's optional. You don't have to do it, but it allows you to have time to talk without your admin being there, right? Say if you have some issues or you have some different things that's going on, you're able to talk about it freely and have someone who does have a voice and can say it for you anonymously. So you still get someone to advocate for you if you're not in the space to. And I feel like lots of times we have those people who are going through things, they don't have that voice, or they like to speak up. So it's like they become swept under the rug. And I feel like lots of times that's what a lot of schools really are about and kind of come around to, is that idea of like the one person with the voice and what they think, but are not comfortable. So I feel like definitely having that space has definitely helped, especially when it comes to like the culture and climate at the school where I'm at. I've noticed that.
I just thought about a time during the last year that I was teaching. It was again the 2020-2021 school year. And I think I was teaching civics. It was 2020 election, which, was was tough. But I remember, like, I think I just like posted something on Facebook, and it was like like look out, or like support your civics educators, like we're out here struggling, like something like that, like we're doing the best we can. And like the head of our school, like within minutes, like had like messaged me just like, what do you need, right? And I'm like, one, I didn't expect like to for well, actually she had shown me to be that kind of person already, but like the expectation wasn't like to get some sort of like response from her. It was literally like, I forgot that we were even friends on Facebook, whatever. I post on this site so seldomly anyway. But she and then like a couple of other administrators like messaged me like later on that day, we're just like, what do you need? And I was like, I'm behind on grading. I'm just trying to get like a handle like on the curriculum and all the things that I've got like coming up. And it's just like this, I'm hamster on a wheel, and I'm like putting all this time in and all this effort in. I still just like just spread so thin, right? And so they're just like, how much time do you need to get a better grasp on things, and like how can we support you in that? And they're just like, here, take 2 days. They're not gonna like, it's not gonna be your personal days. It's not gonna be, any sort of like days that's gonna come out of your bank of like whatever for like benefits, right? take 2 days. We're finding you coverage. If you want to like work at this space like here in the school that you can come to, but you don't have to like be tied to the school. I mean, it was just like this very thoughtful, very intentional, like we're giving you time. It's a gift. Like, and you know, we know this will help you like function better. We know what have you. Like, it's an investment in you. And like, I, I, I was just like, this is, I think I almost cried. Like, I was just so happy. But it just told me again, like it wasn't just like a platitude of like, you know, we're supporting you, we're in your corner, we believe in you, you know, whatever. But like here's like a practical way that we can make sure that we are showing that, right? And it is giving you this time and all these resources to like, you know, to get a better handle so you can be your best you until you're not using your time. And I remember like one time, like during the school year, like my head of school, she said like, do not do any work over the weekend. I don't care like how much you have to get done. Like I'm not gonna let you, like please do not come back Monday, whatever you have done, you know, yeah. So yeah, like you're saying, like boundaries, like she helped me set those and really like actively supported and defended me like with that and helped model that, you know, for everyone. So I thought it was really wonderful.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And just listening to your story makes me really think about this idea of we have the power to reimagine education if we want to. It's just people don't want to. Because if you think about it, the whole thing of why we even have a sick bank or why this and why that is because one, you want to make sure someone's in the classroom so kids have something to do. For two, you want to monitor the money so you know to see if it's coming out our checkbooks, if you know when it's time for us to get paid. And think about it, like if we take that away and like instead of trying to police humans, grown adults, right? Stop trying to control what's being done and give the autonomy and create a place where people not only want to work, but they strive to want to be at, right? And the thing is less of just trying to survive. I feel like lots of teachers and lots of teacher educators are just surviving, to be completely honest. And it takes away the joy. It takes out the love that you really have for your space and the people you are interacting with. And it makes it where it's always this thing of teachers versus students, teachers versus admin. And it's not a humanizing space. And I would just really cry if a principal ever gave me some time out of a sick day. I could use a day right now, right? As you know, it's not going to count against me. I don't have to worry about making these extravagant plans when I'm not here. Because everyone knows, as a teacher, when you come off, when you take a break, it's like, wow, did I ever even take a break? Because I feel like it's so much I missed out on. So just even allowing for that space to happen is just so amazing.
Yeah, that is definitely amazing. And again, it's like if we can't give that to teachers, how do we expect them to give it to their students, right? And if we don't have that, so I'll just share really quickly. Another school I was observing at, a private preschool in Maryland, owned and operated by a Black woman. And, you know, I go into schools a lot. I had to go observe my students, right? Preschools, kindergarten, early childhood, it's a very uncomfortable place because there's a lot of like trying to manage little kids and that's very stressful, right? So normally I get in there and I'm trying to observe this lesson and I'm staring at the clock and I just can't wait to get the heck out of there because every 2 minutes is like, you stop moving, you sit still, you put your, you know, it's constant, right? So I'm at the school and it's a totally different environment. So first I noticed school starts at 9 o'clock. I look over at 9:30 and there's this little Black boy sitting there eating his snack. I said, what's he doing? She's like, he can eat what he wants. And I'm like, he just got here. And she's like, so? And I'm like, but why would he eat now? She's like, I guess he's hungry. And it just blew my mind, right? Like that he just felt the need to get his food, go sit in the corner and start snacking a little bit. Did everybody run a snack? No, he did. Throughout the day, they all snack. Think about just like that one little bit of freedom, letting kids eat when they're hungry. Just think about how different that changes your entire life and day. These kids were just free to eat when they wanted. There was a time too when they all sat down together. Many of them snacked. It was like snacking all day, right? It was like charcuterie all day. Kids just taking little snacks here and there. But it alleviated a lot of the issues that happen when you ask a child to do something and they're hungry. And we don't know why they're hungry. Maybe he got up at 6 a.m. and he's hungry now at 9:30. Maybe when he pulled up in the parking lot, he got so excited that his stomach dropped and felt empty. empty. Like, we don't know why. It doesn't matter. He's a human, and he feels hungry, and he should be able to eat, right? And so it's that little bit of freedom that lasted all day. I didn't look up. I didn't eat lunch. It was 1:30, and I was like, it's 1:30? What? I didn't even know what time it was, because it was so free flowing, right? The teachers were free. They weren't stressed out. The kids weren't stressed out. They were allowed to move in space, do the things they needed to do. And so it felt like a really natural space. Boredom was allowed. One little boy walked around. He was kind of bored, but no one rushed in to fix that. He walked around. He was talking to himself. He came over to me. I gave him lessons on my video camera. He walked back away, and then he went on a nature hunt with another kid. But most teachers would have took those 7 minutes of boredom and felt like something's wrong, but no, let him walk around for 7 minutes and feel that. So there are these opportunities that are out there. And I just think it's important that we think about it for both the adults and the children. What are we doing to make it easier for you so that you can make it easier for them, and to sit back and then let the teachers really do their job, which is document what the children can do, right? We focus so much on what the children can't do that teachers aren't able to show you what they can do, right? And so these teachers are very knowledgeable of what the children are capable of, and they use that knowledge to really enhance the environment. And so it's just, I think it goes along to what both Nkenge and Vanessa were talking about, right? And then teachers know that they can take time off, they can collaborate with each other, they can do all of these things that teachers need to do and not feel guilty about it because they're in a supportive environment. But a lot of times it's the rules, right? If the center director is facing a rule that if you don't come to work today, they are out of compliance with this ridiculous law that says there has to be 2 adults for every 22.1 bodies, right? It throws everything out of whack. So, we need to change that whole system so that you guys can take your days, do what you need to do, regroup, right? And then that can feed back into the children as well.
Yes, y'all, this has been an extremely powerful conversation. Yeah, like Vanessa, 2020, 2021 was my last school year. And I just remember how I left and how broken, honestly, I felt. And so to hear from y'all about, I'm just sitting with like what schools could be, the power to imagine differently, organizing with and in community to actualize the things that we want to see. And also just this reminder that some of what we want to see does exist. And so hearing stories from your different travels and research, Dr. Jones, Vanessa, thinking about the teaching stories that are documented, and Nkenge, thinking about the work that you're doing in classrooms right now, that work does exist. And I'm reminded of that from this conversation and just the work of CJSF's partners that they're doing every day to organize for a different world. And so thank you all to everyone for joining this conversation. Thank you in particular to our speakers, sharing in the chat more information about the powerful work of each of the organizations and individuals you saw today. And thank you so much for coming.